Hello and welcome to this week's instalment of the WhatsOnStage Podcast with me, Sarah Crompton.
And me, Alex Wood.
We've been tearing ourselves away from the drama of a baby robin that's fallen out of a nest and its mum is desperately trying to save it, to talk this week about an amazing new season announcement from the Almeida Theatre, and then also about Patti LuPone, who has given an interview which has ruffled as many feathers as the baby robin.
Actually, the thing on the baby robin that adds the stakes is that there is a fox prowling the perimeter, almost like Jaws, and there's someone lost at sea. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, it is really a miracle that we're recording this podcast given our anxiety levels. However, yes, Almeida season.
Yes, where do you want to start, Sarah?
Well, it's just such an amazing final season from Rupert Goold, who's off to take over the Old Vic. And it just feels, actually for a little bit, we've talked about this before, the Almeida has felt as if it's running every idea it had in a very limited time space. Everything seems to open and then close almost instantly because he wants to cram in another play he's excited about. And this final season is very much that accelerated excitement of, I think, Rupert's time there. I'm an admirer of Rupert Goold. I think he's brought such energy and passion to Almeida, and he has certainly upped the number of new plays that he's put on, which is very much part of this new season announcement.
It's a fantastic blend of returning shows that he loves, new adaptations of existing works, and then just brand new plays. And it's quite sad in a way that there is a rarity of plays that aren't based on any existing IP that manage to get space on a big London stage these days, whereas Rupert Goold has seemingly managed to find the time to programme a whole load of them.
Yeah, 1536, which is currently running, being one of them, which
exactly.
is such an announcement of a real talent. But coming up, new play from Alice Birch, who I love. And she's bringing in the world premiere of Romans, a novel, a new play. So Alex, explain that to me. It's directed by Sam Pritchard, another exciting young talent.
It's funny, as someone who grew up in France for a bit, the word roman means novel. So I'm like, novel's a novel. But I have no idea what that's going to be about just yet, because we've got a slight advanced sight of the season, so we wait with bated breath. But it is directed by Sam Pritchard, who is a wonderful director. He was the associate director of the Royal Court between 2016 and 2024, so worked on some of their fantastic shows, including Alistair McDowell's monologue series, all of it, which was really, really wonderful. So it would be interesting to see how he takes this one on. I think an Alice Birch play, you never know what you've got coming.
No, she's shown with her work with Katie Mitchell and other directors, she's interested in formal experiment. And yeah, I read it, of course, because I'm literal minded, and thought, Romans, and thought of Romans in Britain. But you're absolutely right, of course it is roman.
I don't know, it might be Romans, it could just be, who knows, it could be Julius Caesar themed.
I doubt it.
Speculate.
But I think it will be brilliant, because I think she's an extraordinary fine writer, and in a theatre, she makes you listen to words in a particular way and follow trains of thought in an incredibly idiosyncratic yet powerful structure. She's not everybody's taste. There's something quite stripped back about the way she writes. But I've always loved her work, so I'm excited about that.
She's also one of those playwrights that could very easily have just transferred wholesale into the world of film and TV, because she's had some fantastic successes over there, yet thankfully still finds time to come back to write for the stage.
Well, it's as if the theatre's where she plays, almost. I think it seems to refresh her amazing film and TV work, like Lady Macbeth and so on. I mean, I think she's astonishing.
Next up, we've got Michael Grandage returning to direct the world premiere of The Line of Beauty, which is adapted by the lovely Jack Holden from the Booker Prize-winning novel of the same name. Again, top tier on all fronts in terms of adapter, director and source material. Jack Holden was also announced last week as doing a new version of the Boy George musical Taboo. So he's being very busy. But his two hits so far, which were Cruise and Ken Rex, have both been 5-star smashes. So it's great that he's, again, injecting some life force into the new writing scene in the theatre world.
And I think it's an interesting collision that of talents, because I feel that I love that Hollinghurst novel. I love all Alan Hollinghurst novels, and they're so beautifully written and truthful and insightful about human nature. But they're quite refined on the page. They're very delicate. And I feel that the energy that Cruise and Kenrick's had is, you kind of, I feel that's a really good mix of adapter and writer, because I just like, they've both got very similarly sensitive sensibilities, but one has a different energy than the other. And nice for Grandage, I hope. I mean, Michael Granger's had one of the rare flops of his career with My Master Builder, which is feels like an odd choice for him. And I feel that this fits him like a glove. And the Almeida is a theatre that suits directors like Grandage, who pay such careful attention to detail and to emphasis in their pieces.
After that, we've got Sam Grabner, who was fantastic with Boys on the Verge of Tears at the Soho Theatre, is now penning a new play called Christmas Day. Fingers crossed it's running over Christmas. Directed by James MacDonald, who also directed Boys on the Verge of Tears at the Soho Theatre. So that award-winning team reuniting for this new production. Again, very few details given at this point, but it's nice to see a team that has a proven track record now given an even bigger canvas to work on. So yes, great to see. It goes back to what we were talking about a few weeks ago about new writers getting a chance to continue on a larger scale, now happening here in this situation. So that's another great win for new writing in London theatre.
Yeah. And that's followed by Rupert Goold going back to a show that he really did love and that I loved, that was first seen in London in 2013, had a slightly spotty production history subsequently, but I think, and obviously he does, vanish too quickly. And that's the musical adaptation of American Psycho, the Bret Easton Ellis novel.
I'm a huge fan of that musical soundtrack. I never saw it live because I think tickets were harder to get than £1 million lottery tickets. But hopefully they'll reunite some of the old cast or give some new blood the chance to take it on, because that company originally from 2013 had people like Jonathan Bailey, Katie Braben, Susanna Fielding, Lucy Jones, Hugh Skinner, Matt Smith, people who have gone on to be huge names in their own right, all just assembled on that Almeida stage. Brilliant material from Roberto Aguirre-Sacasa and Duncan Sheikh. Duncan, obviously better known for his big blockbuster Spring Awakening, which was also revived at the Almeida.
Yeah.
So it's nice to see him back in action. As far as I'm aware, the last time the Almeida brought a show back to its stages for a full run, aside from, I think, during COVID, was Albion by Mike Bartlett, which was revived in 2020. So given it's so rare, I imagine that Rupert Goold feels as though there is some unfinished business here, in a similar way to something like Groundhog Day at the Old Vic, where a show has a glorious reception in London, then is taken to Broadway and fails dramatically, and then is brought back to have its image rehabilitated. So fingers crossed it's going to be a wonderful final musical for Rupert Goold at the Almeida.
I feel really excited it's coming back, because I wasn't reviewing then, I don't think. But I remember I was lucky enough to get a ticket, and I do remember the excitement of it. And it felt thrilling. I mean, partly, as you say, because of the cast, which was just astonishing. And Matt Smith was blinding in the leading role. But it was all so strong. And I remember the staging being thrilling. And I think maybe it's a slight problem, and it will be interesting to know whether they address this at all or whether they just go with it. It was quite long for a new musical at the time, and I think they were worried about its length. But for me, it really sustained its interest, and I was surprised on Broadway that I think it closed after 54 performances on Broadway, so didn't actually have the legs that everybody thought it might, and maybe the timing was off, and they changed. Matt Smith couldn't do it on Broadway. So it's great that it's coming back, and it'd be exciting to see who's cast and whether it lands the same way again.
I've listened to a fantastic podcast, I think it's from Wait in the Wings, that goes into a lot of detail about why American Psycho failed on Broadway. And part of the problem was that they didn't do a preview run off Broadway first. So they went cold onto Broadway, which, as many a producer will tell you, often is a recipe for disaster because you need that time to build the momentum. The other thing that they had was a splash zone for all the fake blood. So who knows, that might be the case for London as well. Make sure you pack your Rain Max for returning to London.
There was a lot of blood, I do remember. And that's actually my strongest memory of it being white and red. There was so much blood and very white light. And I was quite glad I was sitting somewhere near the back.
The season does feel like some of Rupert Gould's greatest hits repackaged in new forms, and the next show is Romola Garai, who's had a fantastic time at the Almeida in some fantastic shows like The Writer and The Years most recently. She is now back in a new version of Ibsen's A Doll's House, in a new version by Anya Rice and directed by Joe Hill Gibbons. Again, brilliant names all around. I feel like tick, tick, tick. More Ibsen though, Sarah.
More Ibsen. I mean, honestly, we're definitely going to have to do a whole podcast on Ibsen and what it is about Ibsen that means that he is the playwright of the moment. A thrilling combination, that. And I think A Doll's House, in many ways, of all Ibsen, does resonate because it's so much about a woman being trapped. Ibsen and women is perhaps a subject we will return to in another podcast, but because Ibsen's women seem to me to very much vary between being ciphers for something the leading male protagonist thinks, and then sometimes, as in The Doll's House, being a true examination of what the woman's agency is. And I think that's why actresses like Romola Garai, like Jessica Chastain on Broadway, have wanted to return to that play. And to have an adaptation by Anya Rice seems really interesting. I'm also interested, actually, that this links with something else I've seen at the moment, that just to digress slightly from the Almeida season, Mrs. Warren's Profession has come back in a production starring Imelda Staunton and Bessie Carter, her real-life daughter, with which I was very, very impressed. And that hasn't been adapted as such. But what Dominic Cook, the director, has done is given Shaw a good kicking. And he's tightened his focus to take the spotlight away from all the rather irritating, long-winded men in the play and put it very firmly on the central social dilemma, which is the position of women and their ability to make money from work, and what kind of work and what kind of choices capitalism, marriage, respectability put on a woman. And obviously The Doll's House is very much in that vein, and I think that does render it consistently topical. And I really look forward to seeing it again. I have seen it quite a lot, but I think when you've got such a good production coming up, that really makes you feel excited about it.
We are halfway through the 10 productions that the Almeida has announced. No, it's just incredible how many shows there are. It's just when you think that there's enough excitement, there's a new one that lands. They have really gone all out, as you said at the top, with so many huge productions. Next up is an adaptation of the BAFTA-winning film Under the Shadow, which many consider to be their top film of 2016 when it first was released. But here it's adapted by Carmen Nazir and featuring Layla Farzad and directed by Nadia Latif. For anyone who doesn't know, it's a film set in 1980s Tehran. It's a supernatural horror film with some sort of like political satire elements, but all in all feels like it could be a very rich psychological horror stage show, which within the intimate confines of the Almeida will definitely be one to watch, I imagine. I love horror on stage.
I always there's quite a lot of horror in this season, and I always slightly dread it because I'm a wuss, but it has been a theme of Rupert's time in charge of bringing in international work and looking at different ways of telling stories from world theatre. So I think that's, again, a really interesting choice. It does feel like this final season is very carefully crafted to reflect what he wants people to remember of his time at the Almeida. So it's bold, it's brave, but it's very wide. It's all embracing. It's got a classic. It's got a lot of new writing, and it has got that world influence. It seems to me that one of these will be a Christmas show. And none of them are very obvious as a Christmas show. And thinking of that, I remember that I think the Almeida did Cold War as a Christmas show, which, of course, Polish film, unbelievably powerfully adapted for the stage. One of the shows that I You know, as a critic, sometimes you can't reflect your later feeling about. So I loved it at the time and did recognise that there was something absolutely transfixing about it. But as time has gone on, I've thought about it over and over and over again, and about how resonant that idea of somebody going around collecting songs of the past is. And I feel with this adaptation, it might be something very similar, that it will have a resonance beyond itself.
There's another instinct that Rupert Goold has had. He had it with The Hunt as well, and Cold War, and now this, in terms of taking films that have been incredibly successful, yet perhaps not widely popular, and turning them into stage shows. So fingers crossed it'll be another hit there. Next up, we've got Rebecca Frecknell's final show at the Almeida. She, of course, has had a brilliant run of form with shows like Summer and Smoke, A Streetcar Named Desire, Three Sisters, and Romeo and Juliet. And now, finally, her last show will be a revival of Sarah Kane's hit play. Hit, is that the right word? Would you say Sarah Kane's ever had a hit play or a much appreciated masterpiece, Cleansed, coming to the stage as well?
Yeah, Cleansed, gosh, really amazing to see it again. And interesting women directors want to go back to Cleansed somehow. The last production I saw was by Katie Mitchell at the National in 2016. One of my many moments of bad parenting. Took younger son who was 16, and he still talks about it, which may be good and may be bad. It's an amazing play, and I think that it's interesting that Rebecca Frecknell wants to do it and wants to go, you know, again, these are all choices, that she's leaving those big American plays to have a look at a modern writer of incredible significance and importance, and dealing with violence, which actually is slightly a sub-theme, I think, in some of the work she's done. Certainly Streetcar, there's a theme of violence, and Cleansed is a very direct examination of violence and conformity.
Wasn't there a lot of fake blood in the Dorfman production?
There was a lot of fake everything. There was it was a production in which I closed my eyes quite a lot, but it was devastatingly good. And Katie Mitchell, as you would expect, did it in quite a poetic way. So it was both graphically horrific, but also somehow distancing. So it'd be really interesting to see how Rebecca Frecknell tackles it. It marks that appreciation of Kane as such a significant writer. Tragically short career, but major work that people are going back to and finding new ways of doing all the time.
After that, another return for someone who's not been on the stage for a long time, yet had an aborted attempt in 2020 that fell apart. Mr. Josh O'Connor, BAFTA winner and lovely man all round, will be directed by Sam Yates, who worked on the Andrew Scott Vanya in a new production of Clifford Odets' American classic Golden Boy. Another great big landmark revival as part of the Almeida final season. And again, some proper star power. Very few cast members actually announced in this season, but Josh O'Connor's definitely one to make some headlines.
Tent poles of casting announced. Josh O'Connor, I met, of course, in that aborted 2020 attempt to do Romeo and Juliet. And I always have this incredible affection for him because we did the interviews under COVID conditions. And I was talking to somebody about this quite recently. You forget how utterly weird it was. So we were at the National, we had to do COVID tests going in. We had to decide, sitting at the opposite end of a long table, whether we took our masks off or kept them on. We took them off. And I adored him, and I loved that film he made of Romeo as a result of that. I think it was a film that didn't do any harm to his subsequent film career, which has just taken off. So he's doing more and more major movies, and always interesting choices. He's just done the film with Paul Mescal.
Yes, which was a big hit at Cannes, wasn't it?
Called The History of Sound, which makes me think of Cold War. It was one of the things that made me think of a Cold War because it's about two men who go around collecting songs. And I think, yeah, so that's really exciting. But also that Clifford Odets play that as a student of theatre, I have read about that play. I've never seen it. It has been revived, but I've somehow always missed the revivals. And so I am really excited to see it finally. And it was so significant. I mean, it made Odets this star, and then nothing he subsequently wrote perhaps for political reasons as well as personal reasons, nothing ever hit in the same way again. So, yeah, great choice.
Final show then in the main programming, there's also a community production, is Ebenezer Bamigboy's returning to the Almeida to direct Zachary Momo in Desire Under the Elms, the Eugene O'Neill classic. Another Eugene O'Neill play coming to the Almeida.
Yeah, we've
Zachary
had a bit of
Momo's
premonition, premonition in previous podcast about Eugene O'Neill suddenly coming into fashion. So again, something to book for, something to go along as it. I mean, it is a lovely final season, and I do think it's a fitting farewell for someone who has really kept London Theatre so vital and, you know, has added into running this extraordinarily vivid theatre, doing things like directing Dear England and so on as well. So it feels like a great last hurrah.
Just a word on that final community production, which is 81 Life, co-created by Rihanna Alube and the Almeida. Will involve 81 local people discussing the tapestry of communal excitement that comes out of living in Islington. And I think that's something that's often underappreciated with the Almeida's very glitzy and star-studded productions, is how often they do these outreach shows that allows community voices to be heard on the Almeida stage. This one's created alongside All Change and Cardboard Citizens. And again, it's great that that sits alongside all these big tentpole shows. So great work, Almeida.
Great work, Almeida. And I'm always fascinated by Islington because I have a friend who's lived in square mile of Islington all her life, and all her family have lived there. And she goes back, she can go right back to the 19th century. And she is always fascinating on the history of Islington. It's such a rich and amazing place. So yes, that would be great. And it is. Hats off to the Almeida.
In a bit of a gear change, the other big theatre news story of this week was the gigantic New Yorker interview with one Patti LuPone. And actually, this feels like a pseudo sequel to our podcast episode about great theatre feuds, because Patti LuPone did not leave a stone unturned with her brazen appraisal of the New York theatre scene and beyond. It is really quite scathing in some ways, but there are very few people in the world that would go full tilt like Patti LuPone does often, and with many victims as a result.
Yeah, it's a real no-holds-barred interview. And in that sense, it feels almost old-fashioned because she takes swipes at people she doesn't like. She's very forthright about her dislike of Trump. She rants about the New York traffic scene and the fact that Times Square is now pedestrianised. And it's a fascinating piece. Michael Schulman, who is the writer, has gone back to talk to her on 3 separate occasions and has taken the time to do that and to get to know her, obviously, over a long period. You feel he built her trust over that time, though I suspect she also is outspoken enough that probably he could have done it in one hit, but it gives it a lovely texture and an ability to look back on a long and fascinating career in many, many ways. And so I would say it's a great piece of writing and it's a great interview, of which her side swipes, which are the things that are attracting attention, her ability to sustain and remember slights as she sees them in her career, are a very small part of it. But obviously they're the bit that will get all the attention.
It kind of shows that very interesting relationship between the long form stuff and the social media platforms that will pick at the pieces and turn them into viral tweets. So one of the bits that first caught my attention was actually where she said something. She didn't actually say something. She was asked about Audra McDonald's performance in Gypsy, and Michael Schulman says that she stared into the distance for 15 seconds and then said, "Oh, what a beautiful day it is," as in sidestepping the question, not wanting to say anything, yet implying that she had nothing good to say about the performance. That was obviously picked up and turned into a, oh gosh, Patti LuPone hates Audra McDonald. There's a feud there, which on social media is like touch paper that will set something on fire and people will love the drama. However, there's some really wonderful anecdotes about how when Aubrey Plaza was staying with her, every morning Aubrey Plaza would wake up and Patti LuPone will have made her soup, and Aubrey Plaza remembers that Patti LuPone one time cooked her a whole turkey and then left it for her to eat as sort of trimmings, etc. during a week, and Patti LuPone then jetted off to go and do some gigs across the world and left Aubrey Plaza to basically flat sit with a turkey so that she knew she was never going to be left unfed. And that sort of compassion and love that seems to exist does almost contradict some of the feuds that she seems to keep on the boil. Like you say, you don't get that picture of a person when you do a 10-minute fleeting interview in a junket room in a hotel in North London. You do get it when you spend hours with someone, seeing them in all their different contexts and different pressure points, as is the case here. Michael Schumann, during one of his interactions with Patti LuPone, goes off to a hockey game and sees her in action there. And you see a whole different side of someone when they're in that environment compared to when they're in a restaurant trying not to badmouth someone too much, yet invariably saying something that will be picked up on social media.
And it is incredibly nuanced. And I think that the problem with social media is obviously, and I'm not going to knock it because that's where we are, but it does generate flames around little bits. In a funny way, it makes the long form interview more in peril, because if people feel that things are going to be taken out of context and exploded in the way that they inevitably are at the moment, it makes them less likely to spend long periods with a journalist as well, or a really good writer. I mean, Sean, I think, is a really fine writer. And New Yorker is my, let me say it up front, my favourite weekly read. I once interviewed Ann Tyler, and I said, what are you reading? Which is a question you always ask novelists to see what they're reading. And she said, every week I read The New Yorker from cover to cover. And I thought, yeah, that's my kind of idea, because that is basically my intention. I don't always succeed in it, but I do read it. I think the picture that emerges of LuPone is such an interesting one, because one of the things she talks about is how difficult Evita was for her on Broadway. Her problems with the portrayal under director Hal Prince, which were, how to present this woman who is both iconic and reviled. Prince deliberately isolated her from the rest of the cast and told them to ice her, which I don't think she knew until this interview. And that's a nuance. And the same with Sondheim, who, famously closed the door in her face and yet gave her great sort of late career revival in Gypsy and later subsequently in Company. So it is a really nuanced piece. Whether you can, in an age that we're in, get away with being that abrupt about other people, I don't know.
Is there something semi-tragic about the fact that she keeps returning to the theatre, yet seemingly has such an unpleasant time every time that she does it? I think one of the lines in this is that she just wants to get out and do the screen more often, and there does seem to be a LuPone renaissance on screen of late. She starred in the Ari Aster film Beau is Afraid, and then gained huge sort of cult following in Agatha All Along, which is a Marvel project. It feels as though many doors are now open to Patti LuPone never going back to the theatre. She was on Broadway with Mia Farrow in The Roommate, but could that be her last Broadway role now? Who knows? She might be able to just do a load of screen projects and see her time done there. But she keeps coming back, and that's the thing, is she just constantly tempted back? Is there sort of like that fractious relationship? She actually talks about a relationship that she had quite early on in her early part of her career with a boyfriend that kept spinning her along and then casting her aside. And is it the same with the theatre world, that she gets huge successes and then gets cast aside by people like Hal Prince or Sondheim or Andrew Lloyd Webber and feels jaded and slighted, and yet still comes back every time that something big is offered to her?
Yeah, the boyfriend being Kevin Clyde, which is quite exciting, who she met at acting school. I think it is interesting that you do feel that push me, pull you quality in her, that she's amazing on a stage. I mean, she's absolutely sensational. And Sunset Boulevard, which was the subject of another famous falling out with Lloyd Webber, because she played the role in London simultaneously with Glenn Close playing it in Los Angeles. And LuPone was under the impression that she was going to take it to Broadway, and at the last minute, Glenn Close was substituted. And she did successfully sue Lloyd Webber over the breach of contract. And I remember seeing her in that London production, and for odd reasons, saw her 3 times, I think. I thought she was brilliant in that production. And yeah, I had some sympathy when she didn't get to take it to Broadway. And I later saw close. Of course, she was also brilliant in a different way. And I guess that's the theatre world. And it seems that all the time it rubs Patti LuPone up the wrong way. It just makes her cross and unhappy.
There's that really wonderful story about the press agent who wanted to send something positive to Patti LuPone, and so wanted to send her a bottle of champagne to say congratulations on opening in The Roommate, but didn't read the label, and it actually said congratulations on opening in Sunset Boulevard, which was opening around the same time, the Nicole Scherzinger revival. So imagine Patti LuPone receiving a bottle of fizz saying congratulations for opening Sunset Boulevard on Broadway, something she famously never did. I feel like that press agent probably felt their insides flying into the abyss at that point.
Well, we just want the ground to open up in front of them, wouldn't they? But yeah, anyhow, it's a fascinating piece, and it is a big discussion point. As I say, I've noticed a few people on social media saying you just can't talk like this in this day and age. And she is very much old school, and it's whether those old school honesty, old school refusal to hide your innermost feelings can survive, as I say, at a point where it gets so loud so quickly on social media.
She's also someone looking at the Broadway landscape thinking so few productions have stars attached that can sell, and she knows that she is one of those people, and she has the power to get a producer to a break-even point on Broadway. Yeah, it definitely has dominated some headlines in an otherwise quite busy theatre week. So it just shows the power of Patti LuPone and social media and controversy.
It does indeed. And the power of the long-form New Yorker profile. Long may it last.
Long may it continue, indeed.
And I think that's probably the moment to say goodbye from this week's podcast. We will now return to searching for the robin's fate in the garden. So it's goodbye from me, Sarah Crompton.
And a goodbye from me, Alex Wood. Thank you for listening to this episode of the What's on Stage podcast. Make sure you like, follow, subscribe, leave a comment, rate, and all-round rave about the podcast wherever you can. We'll be back with regular episodes every Friday and a smattering of bonus episodes in between.